Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to turn the out-of-the-box navigation bar that comes with Laravel Breeze, which is a top navigation bar, and we are going to turn that into a side navigation bar, which is also responsive, so it's going to look great on small devices. So let's get going. We begin by creating a new Laravel application using Laravel Sail. Just open your terminal and type the following command. Once this is finished, you can jump into your project folder and start Laravel Sail as it is stated here. I have created an alias so I don't have to type vendor bin sail every time. If you want, you can check out my other video where I go into more details about setting up Laravel Sail. I'll leave the link in the description below. Before starting Laravel Sail, we have to do some modifications to the .env file in our project. This is because I already have another web server and a MySQL server running, so the default ports for both are already in use. If this is not the case for you, you can just skip this step if you want to. Open your project in the editor of your choice. In my case, I'll be using Visual Studio Code. Now, open your .env file and add the following lines at the end. Now we can go back to the terminal and start Laravel Sail. At this point, you should be able to navigate to localhost 8080 and see the default Laravel welcome page. The next step will be to scaffold the authentication system using Laravel Breeze. This not only creates all the necessary code for authentication, but also sets up Tailwind CSS and Alpine.js. First, we need to run the database migrations to get our tables ready. So go back to the terminal and run the following command. If you're able to run the migrations without issues, then you can skip ahead. But if you're on a Mac with the new M1 chip, you might encounter this error. Fortunately, the solution for this is simple. Go back to the editor and open the dockercompose.yml file. Find the section for MySQL and add the following line. Note that this entry is not using any quotes. Save the file and go back to the terminal. Now let's stop Sail using the following command. This will clean up all the Docker images and volumes previously created for this project. Now, let's start Sail up again. This will recreate Docker images with the new configuration. Once this is finished, I'm going to clear my terminal and run the database migrations again. And with that, our database is ready. Now let's add Laravel Breeze to our project using Composer. Once that's installed, we need to run the following artisan command to publish all the necessary code and resources. And finally, we need to install and compile all of our local assets using npm. Okay, so we spent the last 5 minutes just setting up our project using Laravel Breeze. Now it's time to see what we get out of the box. And more importantly, how do we change it? If we go back to localhost 8080, we can see that we now have two links at the top. I'm going to use the register one to create a new user. And once we log in, we get to see the default layout for our application. Now let's examine the code for our project. Again, I'm using Visual Studio Code as my editor, and I have the project open. If we navigate to routes and open web.php, we have this route over here, which is the one that returns the dashboard that we just saw, and it only returns a view called dashboard, and it's protected by this middleware called auth, which prevents us from reaching this view without being logged in. Let's now take a look at this template, the dashboard template. We can find this file inside resources, views, and it's called dashboard.blade.php. This file is quite short, but it does introduce a very important concept, which is blade components. This view in particular uses a component called app layout. Every blade component in Laravel is prefixed with an X dash followed by the component name. In the contents of the component, we have a named slot called header, and we will talk about slots in just a few minutes. And inside this slot, we have a title with the text dashboard, and right below it we have a number of divs that are stylized, and inside them you have the message "you're logged in," which is the message that you see right here. And as you can see, the only two sections that are present in the dashboard template are the title, which is inside a named slot, and the main content section, which is this one. Everything else that you see in the page is actually inside the component. So let's go ahead and examine the contents of the component. There are two types of Laravel Blade components, class-based and anonymous. This particular component is a class-based component. To find the class associated with this component, you just have to navigate to App, Views, Components, and the file name is called App Layout. This relationship is important because if you define a component class called App Layout in camel case, you can then use that component in a template prefix with an X dash and then the component name in kebab case, in this case app dash layout. So let's open the class app layout.php, and as you can see, it's a very short class, and a component class only needs two things. It has to extend from the component class, in this case illuminate view component, and it also needs one method called render, which is the method that returns the contents of the component. It can be inline text, or in this case, another Blade template. So let's examine the contents of the component template. You can find this file inside Views, Layouts, and the file is app.blade.php. And as you can see, this is a normal HTML file. We have the title at the top, some meta tags, a style sheet, a script stack, and then inside the body we have an include, which is the navigation that this component uses, which is this top navigation bar right here. Then we have a header, and inside this header we have the named slot that we saw earlier in the dashboard template, which is this one. So the contents of this header variable will be everything that is inside the named slot, which in this case is just this title tag right here. After the header, we just have a main tag, and inside it we just have the contents of the slot variable. And this slot variable will contain everything else that is not a named slot, in this case, this div content right here. Now, let's take a look at the layouts.navigation file that this component is using. Again, you can find this file inside layouts, and the file name is navigation.blade.php. As you can see, this file is a little bit more complicated. Starting at the top, we can see that this is using Alpine.js, and we'll talk about Alpine.js in a few minutes. We'll be using that to design our own navigation bar. It's also using a bunch of included components that come with Laravel Breeze. For example, this component called application logo, another component called navlink dropdown, and this dropdown component has a number of named slots, as well as using a nested component called dropdown link. So if you're interested in knowing more about Blade components, this is a good place to start. You can also check Laravel's own documentation. And in my next video, I'm going to go into more details about Laravel components and everything that they provide. But for now, let's just start coding our own navigation bar. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to create a new component, a new Blade component, and we're going to do that in the terminal. So I'll open the terminal in VS Studio Code, and I'm going to run this artisan command to create a component. Now I'm using Laravel Sail, so I'll have to use Sail artisan. But if you're not using Laravel Sail, then you just have to use PHP artisan, right? So artisan make component, and then the name of the component in this case is going to be admin layout, and then hit enter, and we get a message saying that the component was created successfully. So to find this component, Laravel actually created two things for us: the class for the component and the template for the component. So let's look at the class first. We navigate to app, view, components, and now we have a new class, admin layout. Like the component that we saw previously, we have a class that extends from component and has two methods. We're not going to need the construct, so I'm going to remove that. And then a render function, like the comment says, gets the view or contents that represent the component. And you can see that our layout was placed in the components folder, and the file name for the layout is actually admin-layout. We actually want to change this because, as I said before, we want this component to be the new layout for the application. So I want to move that file into the layouts folder. So let's navigate to resources, views, components, and I am going to take this new admin layout file and I'm going to move it over to the layouts folder. Also, I'm going to change its name so it's similar to the app layout. So I'm going to rename this simply admin. And you can see that the contents of the template is just a div with a comment having a nice quote. So thank you, Laravel. To save us some time, we are going to borrow the contents of the app layout. So I'm going to open the app layout and I'm going to select everything, hit copy, and then go back to the admin layout, select everything again and paste. Now scroll down to the body section and simply delete everything inside the body. I'm going to save that. And since we changed the name of the file of the template, we want to also modify the component in the render function. So let's do that now. Instead of components admin layout, now the file is in layouts admin and save. Now back to the admin.blade.php, I'm going to start blocking out the contents of the template by using comments and then filling in the contents of the template. So starting off, we are going to have a div that is going to encompass the whole page or the whole template. So let's create just a div here. And we're going to add more details and more styles to this in a few minutes. But for now, let's just start blocking out things. Inside this div, we are going to have two sections. One section will be for the sidebar navigation. So let's comment that out. This will be for the sidebar. And we are going to have another section for the main page content. So let's start with the sidebar. We will create an aside tag like this, and this is where the whole sidebar will live in. And inside the sidebar, we're going to have another two sections. One will be for the logo of the application, so let's block that. And then below that, we are going to have the navigation links. So let's block out the contents for the logo. First off, we're going to need another div. And this is where the logo and the name of the application will be placed in. And below that, we're going to have a button. This button we're going to use to manually close the navigation bar when it's open in small devices like a mobile phone. We'll get into more details about that later on. So inside this div, we are going to have, like I said, a logo and then the name of the application. So for the logo, we're going to need another div, and then below that div, actually not below it, inside it, we're going to have an anchor, so an A tag, and a span, and this span will be the title of the application. We're going to just call it admin for now. And now that I think about it, this button needs to be inside this div, right below this div. So the logo will be a div, and inside this div we have another div to actually show the name and logo of the application, and below it we'll have a button to close the sidebar when it's open. So from top to bottom, let's work on this logo for the application. So inside this A tag, we are going to reuse one of the components that come with Laravel Breeze, and that is the application logo, which we can find inside this file called navigation.blade.php. So let's open that real quick, and let's copy this section here, X application logo. Let's copy that and paste it here. Now for the button, I'm going to use an icon that is an X, and we are going to get that image in an SVG format from a page called Hero Icons. So navigate to heroicons.com and then search for, I think the name is close. Yeah, here it is. This one right here, which is just an X. And you can just click on the copy SVG button, and that will copy the SVG code in the clipboard. And we can go back to the code and simply paste that SVG code in here. Fix the indentation. And there you go. The only change that we want to make to this SVG is add a block class in the class section, like that. And the last thing that we want to block out for the sidebar is the navigation links. So we just create a nav tag here, and this is where we are going to place all the links for navigation. Okay, so we're done blocking out the sidebar. Now let's move on to the main content. And the main content is actually very simple. You just want to create a main tag. And inside this main content, we are going to have two sections. One is going to be a top bar, which will contain a link that will display the username, and that will have a drop down, which will have a link to log out. So for that, let's just create another nav tag here. And finally, let's create a div, which will contain the main content of the component. And like we said before, that content is placed in the float variable. So this is the basic scaffold for the component, and we can save that. And just to test things out, we are going to swap this layout in the dashboard template right here, and we can just swap the name of the component with admin layout. And then go back to the browser and see what changed. Now, as you can see, it looks terrible, but it's going to be improving as soon as we start adding styles to the main scaffold that we just created. But at least we have the beginnings, we have the logo here, the name of the application, the close button, and then the main content section here. So let's start adding some styles to this new layout and start improving it. First off, I'm going to work in this first div, which is the one that holds the entire template. And the first thing I want to do is to make it relative. Next, I want to give it a minimum height of the entirety of the screen. And also in medium to large screens, I want these to be flex. And that's all for the first div. Now let's move on to the aside tag. First, I want to give this element a set value of 10 so that it will always be on top of everything else. Next, I will give it a dark blue background with the text in a light blue shade. And next, just to make it visible, I'm going to give it a width of 64 units. Now let me show you how that looks in the browser. And here we have the beginnings of a side navigation bar. Now let's go back to the editor and keep working on it. Let's give this element padding on the sides, maybe 2 units, and also padding on the top and bottom of 4 units. And as I said before, I want this element to be absolute. Now let's see how that looks. As you can see, when I made this element absolute, it no longer forces the logged in message down below, and now it's just sitting behind it, which is the intended behavior. Now that the element is absolute, I can make it so that it will extend to the entirety of the screen. And I can do that with the class insetY0. Let's see how that looks. And there you go, that looks better. Now let's make sure that there is no spacing on the left. And since I want the sidebar to be visible on medium to large devices, I'm going to make this relative when the screen size is medium or higher. Now, the way that we are going to manipulate the visibility of the sidebar is by moving its location. And in order to move it, we first need to add a class called transform. To demonstrate, I'm going to add a class that will move the sidebar entirely off the screen to the left. Now let's see what that class does. As you can see, the element completely disappears because I moved it or translated it off the screen to the left. Later on, I'm going to use Alpine.js in order to toggle this class on and off, and therefore toggling the visibility of the sidebar. Now let's add a class that will cancel the translation in medium to large screens. Let's see if I can move the screen a little bit. Now let's see how that looks on the browser. Now, if we are looking at the web page, for example, on an iPad, the sidebar will remain hidden. But if I switch to a bigger monitor, the sidebar will remain visible. Now, just to add a final touches, I'm going to make the vertical overflow automatic. And I'm going to move this line down so that it's easier to see. I want the sidebar to have a nice animation when toggling on and off. So to do that, we begin by adding the class transition. Then we will give it an animation curve. And finally, a duration. And as a final touch, I will give it a shadow, which will not be very visible, but it will make it stand out a little bit more. And for now, I'm going to remove this class so that we can see the changes that we do. As I said, I will use Alpine.js later on to toggle this class on and off. And that should be all for the aside tag. Next, I will work on the div that holds the logo and the application name, as well as the close button. Let's begin by giving this a flex layout and aligning the items to the center. Also, I want to separate the first div and the button, which is the close button, and I want to spread them evenly across the parent element. I can do that with justify between. And also, let's give it some padding to the left and right. Let's save and see how that looks. Okay, that looks better. As you can see, the close button is all the way to the right, and the title and the logo remain to the left. Okay, now let's work on the logo and the application title. I want the logo and the application title to sit side by side, so I can do that by giving the wrapping div a flex layout and also aligning items to the center. And actually, it's not align item center, it's just items center, and I have to make that same correction up here. Okay, let's save that and see how it looks. Alright, that looks a lot better. Now I want to give the logo the same color as the text and also make the application title stand out a little bit more. To change the color of the logo, we just have to change this class here from text gray 600 to text blue 100. And now in the span below, let's make the text 2 times bigger. And also make it extra bold. Let's see how that looks. Alright, that's looking a lot better. Although I think the logo and the title are a little bit too close together, so let's give them a little bit more space in between. We can do that by adding a class space x2. In a flex layout, this basically controls the spacing in between elements. Let's see how that looks. Alright, much better. Okay, now let's move on to the button, the close button. First of all, let's make this a type button. And let's add a few classes to it. I want this button to be hidden when the page is on medium to large devices. Also, I want this to be flex, but I don't want it to go below the logo and the application name. To do that, I'll give it a flex layout, but it will be inline. Let's give it a little bit of padding on all sides. And also justify the items in the center as well as align them in the center. These two classes basically put the X button neatly center in the element. Next, I want this button to be rounded. And with the same text color as everything else. I want to give this button a hover effect, and I will make it change color to a slightly brighter blue shade than the background. And finally, I want to eliminate the highlight of the button when it's focused. And I'm going to move this line down so that we can see it better. Alright, let's see how that looks. Okay, if we hover the button, we can see how the button is rounded and the X button is neatly centered, as well as the change in color in the element. Now let's add some Alpine.js functionality so that we can use the close button to hide the navbar. In order to add Alpine.js functionality to our application, all we have to do is use the special attribute xData. We will use this to declare a variable that will hold a Boolean value, and that will determine if the sidebar is visible or not. Any variable that I declare in this div will have a scope of only this div, meaning that the variable called open will be available to all of the elements inside this div. Using this variable, I'm going to declare a conditional class in the aside tag, which will decide if the sidebar is visible or not. Here, I'm basically saying that the class -translate xFull is only going to be appended to the aside tag if open is false. And now in the button, I can define a click event that will change the value of the open variable. With this, every time I click the button, I basically toggle the value of open. If it is false, it will become true, and if it is true, it will become false. Okay, let's give this a try. So if I click the button now, it should hide the navbar, and it seems to not be working. Let me check what happened. Right. This class here, I made a mistake. It should be enclosed in single quotes. Alright, let's give it another try. Let's click the button, and now it's working. Now let's work on a button that will help us show the navbar again. And we will do that in the main content, so scroll down a little, and we're going to work on this nav tag here. First, let's give it a background color and a little bit of shadow. Now inside the nav, let's create another div. Let's give the margin on the x-axis an automatic value. That way everything inside will be centered. Let's give it some padding on the sides. And I'm going to customize the padding on different screen sizes. Now let's create another div inside this one. We're going to make this relative. And give it a flex layout with items center. By default, I want items inside it to be evenly distributed. But on medium to large devices, I want everything to be justified at the end. And finally, let's give it some height, maybe 16. And let's check the browser to see how that looks. I'll close the navbar to have a better look. And so far, it's looking pretty good. Now we're going to create another div inside this one. And this one is the one that holds the button that we want to create. I want this div to be absolute. We will extend the height to the same height as the parent. And place it all the way to the left. I want this to be flex as well, with items center. And finally, I want this button to not be visible in medium to large devices. And this is where we're going to create the mobile button. We start by creating a button tag of type button. We'll use the same click event that we used above to toggle the open variable. And we are going to use another click event, and this one is going to trigger when we click away from the element. Meaning that the navbar will hide if we click outside of it. So in this case, we're not going to toggle the value, we're simply going to set it to false. Let's start by making this inline flex. And align the content in the middle and center. Let's add some padding and make it rounded. Give it the same color for the text. And give it the same hover effect that we gave to the close button. And just like the close button, we're also going to get rid of the outline. Now, just like the close button, we're going to find an icon for it in Hero Icons. So head over to heroicons.com and search for menu. Copy the SVG and paste it inside the button. Now just add a block class to this SVG. And let's see how that looks. Let's close the navbar. And now we have a button here that should show the navbar when we click it. And it does. Oh, and just to show the functionality of clicking away, I'm going to click the button to show the navbar. And then if you click on anywhere outside the navbar, it should hide. And it does.